when my energy is right, I'm doing my best in the world. I think I'm the best friend to people. I think I have the energy to give back in the community or be kind to others. And I think I need to just do things that make me happy and feel keyword fulfilled, because that's when I am the best version of myself that I can be of service to others. Not doing things that I feel like are of service to others, but absolutely leave me empty.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the What You Don't Hear podcast. It's a life podcast. It's a life story podcast. It's a bit of an open journal dive into people's lives as I sit and I uncover the real story behind my guest's journey, finding out what makes them who they are and all that they do, talking about all the ups, all the downs, and all the thoughts and feelings in between, uncovering the parts of their story that we otherwise wouldn't get to hear. I am your host. My name is Ross Tyson. I'm a creative of many kinds, a self-employed maker of many things. And as you probably guessed, one of those things, of course, I do is podcasting, as I bring you a couple different shows at this point. But this one right here, I bring you every other Monday, as well as sporadically on Fridays for the 15-minute Friday episodes. I'm also going to take a moment here to remind you that if you do want to check something else out outside of this show, I've got some options for you there. So first, I also do an improv comedy podcast along with this one. It's called Whose Life Is It Anyway? It's kind of like this show, but imagine if the guest's life story was completely made up and there's a bunch of improv games and a bunch of messy chaos surrounding the story that guides it along. And also, I would love for you to check out my newest show. It's called Honestly Same, where myself and two of my very best friends and co-hosts, Leah and Brittany, we sit down to talk all things life, discussing the good, the bad, the ugly, and our experiences around all of it individually. So yeah, I rarely talk about those other shows on here. I'm trying to do that a little bit more because, of course, I want you to go check those out. I want you to like those shows as well. Options, folks. I have options for your entertainment, and it's probably not slowing down anytime soon. And this week, I have another virtual sit-down for this episode, and this time it's with a longtime internet friend who I've constantly been about pretty much 1 degree of separation away from being real-life friends with. I don't know how it took so long, but I'm glad that we finally made it happen, because this week, you get to hear myself and my guest, Tori Kravitz, become friends, and I absolutely love it. I think you will too, because Tori shares her story of, navigating through the music industry and the many ups and downs while doing it. And of course, if you know her, you're very much aware that she certainly knows her way around a microphone and a podcast and interviewing of any kind, because she has done plenty of those over the years. So it makes for a very fun and honestly a smooth conversation this week that I totally loved. But before we get to that, before we get to more concert and music talk this week, let's talk about some other live concerts that you should know about, especially if you live here in Ohio, because our friends over at Promo West Productions are constantly bringing rad shows through here. And I'm going to tell you about some right this very moment, because we are supported by our friends over at Promo West Productions, and this is how I support them back. So if you're interested in catching a live show, maybe you want to check out one of these upcoming concerts that are brought to you by Promo West. They've got Manchester Orchestra and Jimmy Eat World at Kemba Live Outdoors on Saturday, August 19th. That one is right around the corner. Granger Smith at Kemba Live Outdoors the very next day on August 20th. Ways Blood at Newport Music Hall on August 30th. And Local Natives also over at Newport Music Hall on September 11th. So if you want to grab tickets to any of those shows, you can. Just jump over to axs.com. Or, as always, for more information on these or any other upcoming concerts, if you want to find out who's coming to town and when, you can get all that info over at promowestlive.com. We are also supported by our friends over at Midwest Photo. Now, Midwest Photo is a video, audio, and yes, of course, it's a photo store located right here in Columbus. So what all does Midwest Photo do exactly? Well, do they sell gear? Do they rent gear? Do they provide, events and classes to teach and grow the local photo community here in Columbus? Well, that would be a yes to all of the above. They've got it all. You can buy tons of things there. Tripods, cameras, stands, lighting support, backdrop, you name it. They probably got it. Fun fact, the yellow backdrop that I use for nearly all the guest portraits here on this show. Yep, I bought that at Midwest Photo. But of course, if you're not looking to purchase, the good news is they rent gear as well. It's in a list of many services that their very rad staff are ready to help you with the moment that you walk in. For real, whenever I've went in there for something, there is always someone super ready to answer some questions and talk about video or photo or just creativity in general. And along with the rentals, they also offer full in-house printing services, film development and scanning, used gear buy and sell, and even classes that I mentioned earlier that you can further your knowledge about the art and craft of photography. And the cool thing is, when you shop with them, you're not just supporting local. It doesn't stop there. You're not just shopping small, but you're really supporting people who love photography and do a lot of work to support the local photo community here in Columbus in general. So go check them out. If you do, tell them that Ross at What You Don't Hear sent you their way. And if you want to find out more information on everything that they're about in general, well, you can follow them online at impex_photo_video. Or simply jump to impex.com. That is MPEX.com. And I thank them very, very much for sponsoring this episode. Okay, let's do it. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Let's get to know Tori. I absolutely love this conversation. Tori is such a talented and a rad individual that I was so stoked that I finally got to sit down with her, even if it is virtually. It still counts. It was a blast getting to know her and her story and all the things that she does because there's been a lot. So let's dive in. It's episode 90. Man, can you believe it? Episode 90 of What You Don't Hear. But here it is. This is my conversation with my guest and my brand new friend, Tori Kravitz. Know that you know your way around a podcast and an interview very well at this point in time. So,
please break my flow. Let's shake it up.
Yes, 100%. I love it. Well, let's see if we can establish some sort of a flow here. Do you want to make this official and let's make a podcast happen?
In 5, 4.
Now the countdown, and we're live. Here we go. We are live to our wonderful studio audience, millions of people around the world. Tori, welcome to the show. I am so stoked to be doing this.
Likewise. I was just saying before this, it's like we've been running on parallel roads. We've known of each other's existence for so long, but it's the first time we're actually speaking beyond emails, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I was so stoked that you were down to do this. And it's funny because, I feel like somebody could listen to a lot of these episodes and be like, oh, you say that to everybody. But the truth is I do. And what I will say to you is the same thing I tell a lot of people is that you've actually been on my list of guests that I've wanted for a minute now.
Wow.
But there's a lot of different ways that I just sort of dig through the list in different times where I'm like, am I ready to reach out to that person? Or how would I, because for a while I honestly wasn't doing remote recordings. I think actually to set up Davey's episode, you and I had chatted about that where I was like, I don't really know if I have a setup that I like. And then we're like, you know what, let's just try and make it happen. And truthfully, you helped open the door to me even being more comfortable with remote recording. So I love that we are now doing this now.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, I remember when we were talking to set up Davey, I was trying to persuade you. I'm like, no, it's going to be good. We can do it. He's got all the equipment. It'll be great.
Yes.
But it is different. I do understand that too.
It definitely is different. And now, I've done a handful of them for this show now. And I do have to say, my biggest worry, obviously outside of someone's internet, dumping out during the middle of it or something like that, my biggest worry was, does the flow of the conversation still feel as authentic as the in-person face-to-face thing, right? And so far, so good. All the conversations have flown exactly how I would hope that they would. There hasn't been any weird disconnections. And I'm very, very excited because I feel like the exact same thing is going to happen with you in this conversation. Because, of course, you know your way around a microphone. You know your way around an interview and a podcast. But, back to my earlier point, you really have been somebody that I have wanted on this show for a while. And based off of something you said, you and I have been 1 degree of separation away from being friends, I feel for a while. We have had different friends here and there that's oh yeah, we're 1 step away from being friends. I'm stoked to actually establish a friendship in my way of having a cheat code of making friends, which is podcasting with somebody and talking about their entire life with them.
I do the same thing, with starting a podcast over the last couple months. I think I said it in a recent episode of like, I feel like I'm making friends. Every episode, whoever we have on becomes a friend. So now I'm like, okay, who do I want to be friends with next? Dude. I mean, yes, like not really, because obviously there's more to it, but it's always nice when you like make a new friend.
Oh, 100%. And of course, like, yes, it's a podcast and we're making a show and it needs to be cool and fun and all that sort of stuff. But like, yeah, I won't lie at all. Like, you know, I've been doing this show for a little over 3 years now. And like, it is absolutely a cheat code to make friends. It 100%
And when you're an adult, it gets so hard to socialize and make friends. Like, I sometimes think about my 20s and I'm like, how did I have so many friends and where have they all gone? So I think like this has opened up the door to it again.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to dive into your story, but can we talk about that for a second? How difficult it is. I feel like I am just starting to realize that right now of like the awkwardness of like, I don't know if it's maintaining or making new friendships or whatever as like an adult and what that looks like. Like anytime I ever heard anybody say that before, I was always like, oh yeah, whatever. Like, nah, you're just saying that because like you're just not good at making friends. And now I sit and like I'm like, wait, no one has time for anything. No one's making time for anything. Like, oh my gosh, this is so weird. And again, most of my close friendships are now formed via a podcast. Like, do you feel like you experience the same thing? Like, is that sort of where you're finding yourself at now?
Yeah, like now I work remotely as well. So that adds a whole other layer of challenge because it used to be, through school or through work or, you know, when I was on Warped Tour, all of my friends were Warped Tour friends or, you know, just music scene. And as I get older as well, my back hurts. I don't want to go to shows all the time. So I'm a little more selective of the shows I go to. I'm not like going to festivals constantly. So a lot of it ends up being virtual because I'm working from home or it's people that I knew prior to working from home. And yeah, it's just, as well, being an adult is busy. We all have obligations. And so I have a friend I've been messaging for, it must be like 3 months. And we're like, how about this weekend? No, I have a pottery class this day. What about this day? Sorry, I have meetings till 6:00. And it's just, that's life now, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm very curious on your take on this as someone else who, I mean, again, we'll dive into it, but I see you as somebody who is pretty active. You're doing a lot of things. You got a lot of, you know what I mean? Like a lot of hands in a lot of places of just like doing a handful of different things. I'm the same way. Do you feel like you're good at time management or do you feel like that's like a part of the chaos that adds to it? Because I ask that because when I'm having those conversations with friends, where I'm like, hey, when are you available? When can we do this? And I get like, oh, I don't know, like life's chaotic. Sometimes it's very odd because from my perspective, I'm like, I'm actually good at making time for things. It's just getting somebody else to be down for that. As somebody else who does a lot of different stuff, like, how do you feel like your balance of time usually is like? Like, are you good at it? Or are you like, dude, I'm just like going crazy. I don't know what's going on.
I think I'm pretty good at it. I think I'm pretty disciplined. I think you kind of have to be when you're juggling so many different things because I'll only dedicate myself to something if I know I can give it 100% and do it well. So like, I don't juggle a million things like very haphazardly, but my life is just like 10 different to-do lists at all times, like checklists. So in that regard, I think it keeps me very organized. I think where my time slips is I'm so busy and my brain is just constantly working that when I'm done, all I want to do is be left alone on the couch. So that's where the social life goes a little like askew as well, because the time I have left, I just want me time. So yeah, I'd say I'm good at the time management. Just
I feel like it's not to kind of dive into the cliche quotes here at the beginning of the show, but like,
I
do feel like it's a case of, you know, I feel like most often it's not that we don't have the time, it's that we don't make the time for things. And I feel like ever since I learned that a handful of years ago, it's like, oh yeah, that's actually kind of right. You know, like if I want to do the thing, I will figure out how to make the time. Rather than just be like, oh, I don't know, I've just got 100 things and there's no way I can pull it off. It's like, hey, we get busy. Life can be chaotic, especially as we become adults and we figure out all these things that we then have to do. But I do ultimately think it comes down to like, do we not have the time or are we just not making the time for things? And because of that, I feel like I've almost become hyper aware of time management now because I do love juggling 100 different things at once because I'm like, hey, I want to be fulfilled and creative and do all this sort of stuff. But in order to do that, I need to make sure that I'm not driving myself insane by doing that. So I need alone time. I need social time. And it is still a battle. But I often find the battle comes from like, I'm prepared and ready, but it's not everybody else that might be involved in it. Not always is.
It does take two. I mean, have you found like a strategy or a hack yet to like, I don't know, master this adult friendship and social life thing yet?
Dude, so we are having this conversation at a very interesting time because I feel like it has recently like shown itself again as like kind of a problem, if I'm being like, for me at least.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like I ran into it a couple years ago, got a little bit of hold of it, of just like, my first step was realizing that I wasn't making the proper efforts and that I wasn't actually managing my time well. Like I was managing my business and creative time well, but I could identify I wasn't managing my social time well. So that original sort of like awareness to it was, hey, you know what? Okay, I need to make some adjustments. And then I made those adjustments, and then what became, the new normal and all this sort of stuff, the new flow. Now I'm realizing, just like with anything, you gotta upkeep, you gotta have maintenance on things, and sometimes that doesn't exactly go the right way. And so we're talking about this at a really interesting time because I feel like in the middle of it where I'm like, man, like no one really has time, and I can't control someone else's time. I can't make them make the time, quote unquote, right? That's totally up to them.
You could try, and then you're going to lose all your friends.
100%. And that's the other thing is like, I'm now finding myself where like, I'm the type of person who like, if I haven't heard from somebody in a couple months, like I love checking in with people every couple months. Like I've made it kind of a discipline of mine, to like, not to like need something from them or like, hey, we need to hang out, or hey, can we do this? But more so just like, hey, what's up? How are you? What have you been up to? And because it usually spawns some like fun, positive, simple conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like, even keeping up with that, I'm now noticing like there's like less and less people that are like, they'll take 2 weeks to respond. And I'm like, whoa, like, and then their response is, I'm sorry, I've had so much going on. And I'm like, dang, like everyone just has a bunch of stuff going on. Like, I don't know what's going on. And so it is this weird, almost, I would dare say, imbalance that I feel like I'm dealing with currently that I'm trying to figure out. Like, is there anything on your side that you're like, hey, once I started doing this, like, I feel like it worked?
Well, as you said that you have a discipline of checking in on your friends, I just made a little note on my sidebar saying check in with so-and-so because it was someone that I was supposed to call last weekend and didn't. So
love it.
Safe to say we're kind of in the same boat. I think I might be kind of teetering on the fence of the person who takes 2 weeks to reply. But I think for me, I have learned it's quality over quantity. So I have a few really good friends who live close to me that I can count on, that I can see often. And I just value them and don't take them for granted. And I think that has been fulfilling enough for me where I don't necessarily have to, because I do struggle with juggling, checking in on a bunch of people and keeping up with a lot of people at a time. But if I can keep a really close circle of people I absolutely adore, I'm learning to come to terms with that.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to dive into, we're talking about juggling, all this sort of stuff, doing a bunch of things at once, 97 to-do lists. I want to dig into what all you do, because I'm relatively familiar with what you do, but I still feel like I feel like my vision of you is other people's vision of me, where they're like, I get what you do, but also there's so much that I'm not sure. And so even though I feel like I do understand all that you do, I'd love just to hear like the list of things that you indulge in.
Do I even understand what I do?
Also,
that's the real
might
question.
Be the question. That might be the actual question.
I wear a lot of hats, and it's changed a lot over the years. Because I had like a stint where I went through a crisis and just wasn't in the music industry at all, and so now that I've come back to it, I'm just like all guns blazing. So what do you want me to just like give you the bulleted list of my jobs at the moment, or?
Yeah, because I know that again, we were talking about it earlier, like you now do the podcast, you are back doing like interviews and all that sort of stuff, but even before that, I mean, you were doing a bunch of interviews and all that. Like have you kind of like always sort of like existed in that sort of like multimedia world, or is that where you would say like, oh yeah, I'm an interviewer, I'm a podcaster, or is there something else that I'm like, oh yeah, I wouldn't have thought to explain it like that?
Interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, I started with a YouTube channel when I was 15 years old, so that was 2010, I believe I started it. It was Rock Forever Magazine. It was my own little like high school interview YouTube channel venture. So that was really where it started for me. Then leading into Warped Tour, where I was doing video blogs and interviews and social media. So I just swiftly transitioned from my own YouTube channel into that, led to a little thing with alternative press for a hot minute. And then after that, I went into full crisis of how do I do this full time as like a viable career? Had a stint in the fitness world for like 2 years where I was a trainer in group fitness, and then realized, oh, this ain't for me. I need to get back into what I actually do. And then went into music PR, which is how we ended up reconnecting. And so I still do that with Whoa, That's Fresh PR. I do publicity for rock and metal bands, fitting.
Perfect.
And then because I was pitching to music publications, I started to try to think of how do I get my foot back in the door in hosting. I was keeping an eye on where the opportunities could be. And the editor from Knotfest was like, Tori Kravitz from Warped Tour? Why are you emailing me about a band? And when I realized he knew my work and knew who I was, I just swooped in immediately. I was like, Knotfest is such an incredible platform. Please, please, please. And ended up pitching them She's with the Band. It took about a year to get it off the ground. Or no, maybe like 6-7 months to get it off the ground from when I pitched it.
Okay.
So now I do PR and the podcast. And from the podcast, I've just started a couple weeks ago, covered my first festival in many years.
Okay, so I love all of that, and I want to dive into each thing. I think it's most fitting if I want to dig in first to like, what makes you want to start a YouTube channel at 15? Is it just like, are you infatuated with like just the music industry or whatever it may be? Or were you just like, hey, this is, because I asked that because nowadays, yes, there's probably a lot of kids who are like, I want to be a YouTuber. I want to be a whatever. I honestly, like, even though I have always loved the idea of like being on camera or loved the idea of maybe hosting something, I never sat and said, I want to be a host of things. Right. Yeah. And so like, where does that idea first pop up for you where you're like, I'm going to make a YouTube channel?
You know, it is a great question, actually, because if I try to put myself in my 15-year-old brain, I actually don't even know, like, it happened because, like, I was just excited about music. Like, when MySpace was a thing, I was a part of some street teams. I was always posting the bulletins about new bands, like, loved the profile songs, and that ended up just being, like, me promoting music. So just through meeting other music fans, there was a girl who had a little, like, zine online and had asked me to interview a band for her, just kind of on a whim. And it was a band I really loved. And so I went, interviewed them, and was like, that was the coolest experience of my life. I was in their dressing room. I'd never been backstage before. I was sitting and actually getting to have a conversation with them rather than like being in the meet and greet line. And it was like a revelation for me that I could ask them anything I wanted as a fan and like just also be able to share it with other fans. So I was like, I could do more for this girl, or I could start doing it myself. And so when I saw that she could do it, I started it myself.
Yeah, no,
and
that
then
totally
covered a
makes
Warped
sense.
Tour. Yeah.
Okay. So where in general does the, like, I know the simple answer to this could be like, well, who doesn't love music and who doesn't want to be involved? Mm. But really, where for you does like that real interest in the music industry even spawn from? Like, did you grow up just like surrounded by music all the time and you're like, okay, now I'm forming my own taste the older I get, and now how can I get involved? Or like, take me back to that.
Well, when I was a kid, I probably tried to play almost every musical instrument. I did piano, I did clarinet, I did violin, I did guitar. None of them really stuck, but I loved them anyway. Like, I wasn't particularly great at any. I think violin was the one that lasted the longest because I started learning like Jonas Brothers songs on violin and thought it was funny.
Incredible.
But like, I was a huge fan of like Hilary Duff and Disney Channel and yada yada. And then as I became a teenager, rebellion, you know, like I mean, you're wearing a Limp Bizkit shirt, so you must understand to some degree, right?
It
like,
gets us all.
Yeah, teenage rock rebellion, and I found Flyleaf, and I found Pierce the Veil, and you know, all the scene things, and just felt like in moments of like true angst or frustration, like I just felt heard, and it felt like a catharsis for me. Yeah. And that's where I think it started to become more of just like something I did casually or for fun, and it felt like really personal.
Right, right.
Yeah. I don't know. Did you feel that way too? I mean, like, as somebody who enjoys music as well.
You know, like, I almost don't know what it was for me necessarily. I think, like, when I think back to being younger, like, one of the very first things I did, because, like, I was originally, like, in bands in my hometown before I started, like, working with them or whatever, right? And I was also from such a small town where just nothing happened, you know? So it was like my cousin was in a band who like was like the only band in the area that played music that we were all beginning to like, of like scene music and all that sort of stuff. And so it was like, oh my gosh, like, heck yeah. Like I became the de facto bassist, AKA the person who's like looked at a guitar before and they were like, I bet you can play bass. And I'm like, sure can. So like we went and did that whole thing. And I for me, I quickly realized that like, one, it was probably just a thing that teenage me was like, this is cool. I want to be cool. Right. But then the next layer was I quickly realized that I focused more on like the marketing and branding side of everything, where like I wanted our band to look and feel like all these other bands that we wanted to be like, right? I was like, what's the difference? Like, why can't we have cool photos or have cool designs or like get good recordings or whatever it is? And so that sort of cascaded me into like the snowball effect of, all right, cool. I'm less concerned about like being in bands because my head always goes to the back end side of things, the marketing, the campaigning, the branding, all that sort of stuff. And then that led me down basically over a decade journey of like kind of like working in like the creative industry in general, but a large portion of that being in the music industry until recent years where I officially was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go do all these other things.
That is so wild. I just need to comment on the fact that you said how you felt like being in a band was cool or liking that kind of music was cool, because for me it was like the polar opposite, because I went to like a prep school and it was so uncool that I had red streaks in my hair and listened to rock music, and it was like the ultimate form of rebellion for me. Like I would stomp around school letting people know I was pissed.
Yeah.
And it was, it's just so interesting that we had such different experiences with the same genre of music.
And it's interesting because like, even though I feel like there was like a small group of me and my friends in my hometown who were like scene kids, right? Everybody else was just like small town Ohio kids. So there was that little bit of like, why are your pants so tight? But like, I also feel like there wasn't this like, I almost feel like it wasn't driven by rebellion. It was just like, for us, it was like, oh, this is like the stuff that we currently like. And this is how we want to dress because we want to dress like those people. And everyone else was like, kind of weird, but I mean, I don't know, we're cool. Like, it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, so they're almost, that's interesting that like, yeah, it wasn't really, for me, it was sort of a thing that like people were like, again, why are your pants so tight? And why is that V-neck so deep? But, you know, and why are you straightening your naturally curly hair? I don't understand. Yeah. But it still was like, oh yeah, cool. Like, that's fine. And I think it was because like, even though it was such a different thing for anyone to be doing in my hometown, my town was so small that I feel like people were just like, yeah, sure. People are just, I don't know, do what you want. Like, I think it's weird, but who cares, right? And so like, it was, I think for me, that first little bit of like creative expression, right? So it wasn't so much a rebellion, but it was like, oh, I'm getting to like kind of begin to find more of who I want to be. And of course, I look back at those moments too, where I'm like, all right, I like to be a me, but why did I dress like that? Like, why did I do that? You know, like I love pulling up like my senior photos. They're basically solo band promos. Like it's just me broodingly like swooped, like straightened hair and a V-neck. And I'm like, yeah, if there was like 4 more of me, I'm a whole band. This is dope. So
I can pinpoint the exact era. It must have been the 2010s. You know, if there was a deep V 100%. Involved in skinny jeans and straightened hair, I know exactly what era this was. 1,000,000%. I graduated in 2011. So I'm like, we're deep into like, yo, scene music is like on the rise now. And it's all that sort of stuff. And, but for me, like during that time, I uncovered that I was like, wait, I don't know necessarily what I want to do, but I know that I have this focus on the marketing and the branding side and like that back end. When was it for you? Like, was it during the time of like the YouTube channel, or was it sometime after that? Like, or maybe I'm jumping so far ahead in the timeline, we can slow it down a little bit. But like, no.
Do you remember, or can you identify like when that moment was of like, because again, nowadays everybody wants to be a content creator, and it's a label that a lot of us tend to be like, don't call me that, but yeah, that's
I know.
What I'm doing.
I will do anything to avoid the content creator title. I don't want it.
I don't want that either. But like, you know, back then that wasn't a thing. Yeah, right. It just wasn't. Right. So it's like there wasn't really necessarily, unless obviously correct me if I'm wrong, like there wasn't necessarily a thing that you're like, oh yeah, I want to be a content creator. I want to be an influencer or whatever.
Oh yeah. I was willy-nilly in that time.
Yeah. Do you remember like where that interest in that came from? Like, yes, we want to be a part of the music industry or be a part of music and just doing it for fun. But like, was there a time where you identified, wait, this whole like interview thing I really, really like to do, or this whole, whatever, for lack of a better term, content creation, I like to do this. Like, do you remember that moment?
Yeah. I think it was twofold for me. There were two kind of aha moments that spawned the realization that I needed to pursue it for something more than just like, I'm getting to meet some bands backstage. The first was discovering the Warped Tour pit blogs, funny enough, which later ended up being my job. In 2010, I was the biggest fan of Tiffany Mink, who was the pit reporter at the time. My first Warped Tour, the first person I met and took a picture with was her. And when I saw what she was doing out there, I was like, this is something I could do. I could absolutely do this. It would be a dream come true one day, but I would watch her pit vlogs and I loved them. So that became kind of like a fuel for me, where I was like, if I do great work with my YouTube channel and I like keep this up, maybe one day when I'm old enough, when I'm 18 and can apply for this job, I can do it. The second was, from the get-go, I was really ambitious with the kind of interviews I would request. Like, I remember in my first like couple weeks of having a YouTube channel, I requested a Deftones interview. You know what I mean? Like,
love it.
Because the worst that could happen is they say no or they ignore my email. They actually did reply and say no, which was very gracious.
I mean, yeah, getting a reply at all is dope for most people.
Right. And I remember landing some really big interviews right at the beginning. Was like Big Time Rush, Ariana Grande, and Never Shout Never. I was like obsessed with Never Shout Never. So to get that was just crazy. And so when I started to realize like the capabilities of just trying, I started to really put the effort in of let's have a logo. Let's make sure every video is cohesive. We're going to post every single week. I'm going to absolutely hustle, even if I have to interview some local bands just to get a week filled. I want consistent content and I'm going to do this. And also because I really didn't have friends in high school, because I just did not have a community of like-minded people in my sphere. It was like my outlet. So I would spend my study halls blogging. I would spend all of my time on my emails. It was like, that was my thing. So when I realized I could actually pursue it and there was like that goal of Warped Tour in mind, it was like tunnel vision from there forward. And luckily I did have my mom's support. She was filming every interview for me. So she definitely helped drive me too.
That's so sick. And that honestly, that leads perfectly into the next thing I wanted to ask you is before we keep, trekking down towards that like goal of Warped Tour and all that sort of stuff, like what was growing up like in general? And like, because you just mentioned like, cool, mom is down to like sit and help me, film these things. So was that like slightly like, creative side of things like supported growing up? And obviously, yes, it just popped up like when you're in high school and you're into bands and all that sort of stuff. But like, you also mentioned you're like, yeah, I kind of was like on my own little thing. Like there wasn't a ton of friends who had the same interests of me and all that sort of stuff. So like when you look back at growing up, I also find it interesting that even when you're just getting started in this phase of first having a YouTube channel, you kind of said that you understood that like, in order to get the thing that I want, I have to put the work in to get it. I'm just going to take the chances. There's not a lot of people, whether starting out or whether 10 years into it, have figured that out, right? That's a tough thing for some people to understand. So I asked several different questions in one to say, does any of that like come from like how you grew up? Was any of that supported while you were growing up? What was that like?
I feel like I have to get slightly personal for my answer to really make sense. My mom was is the biggest cheerleader. She would help buy equipment I needed. She would take me to every show. And she loved a lot of the music too. She still loves Bring Me the Horizon, Falling in Reverse, all these bands. I'm just like, Mom, stop it. That's weird. But she was super into it. And I think she just realized like it was a healthy thing for me to be involved in. And it was helping me build a work ethic and, kept me out of trouble and stuff. My dad, on the other hand, was not supportive. I think he just wanted me to have a more traditional job path. He wasn't really a fan of the music, kind of saw it as a teenage girl obsessed with boys. And I was like, no, that's really not it. And so that also, in a way, fueled my fire where I was like, well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you that I'm going to do this. And so my mom also did see it as kind of an escape from home when I was not fully supported. So she would kind of take me out and say, cool, we're going to go to a show tonight. And so, yeah, I think that did help with my drive a lot. And yeah, my mom is a great role model to have, luckily.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Like, do you feel like that balance of getting support and sometimes not getting support, do you feel like that actually kept you balanced in like being able to chase these sort of things? And I ask that because I feel like I had versions of that growing up where so I had a split family growing up. My parents were never technically together. I'm here by accident. So,
well, we're glad you're here.
Right. And so, I had my dad's side, my mom's side. Right. And, I've told this story ad nauseum, so I'll keep it short, but like, for a longest time I had a stepmom that just wasn't the best. We'll say that. Right. And so on my mom's side, I feel like I had this version of life that was like very chill, very relaxed, very focused on, treat people well. We don't have a lot of money. Here's what we do. We're about like family and relationship and doing what you want. Where on my dad's side, not so much my dad, he was great. But when stepmom was in the picture at that point in time, it was very materialistic. It was very much like her buying me things and trying to show me this like weird life where it's like, we do have money and here's where happiness comes from. And so I say all of that. I know that's like a deep dive off the edge of like, how the hell do you bring this back to like a creative journey?
No,
but
I know you
say all that because like those two versions, I almost had two different lives kind of growing up, right? Now they both impacted me in different ways, but one was, wow, I'm not being treated great over here, but I get everything I want. And I don't have everything I want over here, but I'm being treated amazingly. And so for me, I feel like that sort of gave me like a constant, even though I was very stressed as a child because of that stuff, but like it sort of eventually gave me a zen. It almost gave me a middle ground to be balanced in, right? To where I wasn't so much like super far on one end, so I only wanted the other a lot. Like I had both of those experiences. So I say all of that story to ask you, like, do you feel like any of that was any of what you experienced of like kind of almost getting that balance of like, here's kind of what a little bit of both feels like. And I feel like that sometimes restructures our thought process on how to handle those things.
I'm going to say no, only because my relationship with my father was really unhealthy. It was bad. So for me, I was lucky as a teenager that I was very certain of who I was, and I was not willing to bend to anyone. When I was in high school, I remember, no one really accepting who I was. And I was like, well, I'd rather be alone than in bad company. I am going to stay in my lane. I'm going to do what I want and what I love and what I feel is aligned with who I am. And I'm not bending for anybody. I don't know how, as like a 14, 15-year-old, I was like that. But I look back and I'm like, okay, Tori, that's great.
Love that. Yeah.
But I think if anything, the way I was treated from the not so good side of my family only further propelled me into that mindset.
100, yeah, no, and that 100% makes sense. Again, that's why I asked that, because I'm like, okay, what was that process like for you? What did it effectively teach you and kind of shape you into like, well, this is kind of why I want to start doing these things, right? Whether it's that
interesting though, how the perspectives can be so different in similar situations. That is wild.
Right. And yeah, and of course none of that's me saying that like, oh, this, stepmom situation that I had wasn't bad. It definitely, I can identify there's a lot of things that I'm like, oh yeah, that shaped me in these ways. But in an odd way, when I start to look back, I am like, okay, cool. I had both sides, and there was for some reason something in me that was like able to identify both sides and know what I liked and didn't like about each. And even if I wasn't consciously making that decision growing up, the older I got, the more I was able to identify like, oh, wait a second, this was me rebelling, right? But this was also me using this as a positive influence. So in a way, like I do think it's not, maybe encouraging isn't the right word, but it's just I can relate to your explanation of like, yeah, no, I did use that as fuel, because of course we do, right? We and I always think about like, how did I actually not rebel in a negative way? Right? Because
I wonder
of the
the
bad
same thing.
Yeah.
I thought at the time listening to Asking Alexandria was like my negative coping. But I'm like, yeah, that was fine.
Dude, it's insane. Like I think about that all the time. It's actually nice, even though, we went through not fun things, but it's nice to hear somebody else say that, because like I think that all the time, where I'm like, like I don't regret not rebelling in terrible ways or something, but it is such an interesting thing where I'm like, man, like there was a lot of not great stuff that was going on in my life until I was about 13. And I'm like, how did I not just like dive off the deep end of just like out of anger or out of spite, even though the things that I did do still were like relatively tame. Like you said, it's like, yeah, I'm going to jam Asking Alexandria all night or something. And it's like, yeah, okay, cool. You know,
It's
like
fine.
that's great. Like
Yeah.
for me, like I didn't even delve into like, even as a teenager, like I didn't even delve into like drinking or partying or anything. Like, so I was like somehow really tame, but I don't know if, you know, I was just like, you know what, I'm going to pursue all my dreams and that's how I'm going to rebel. It's like, okay, dude, that's fine.
Right.
Like, but
It's
I do
so
think about
weird.
that.
Yeah. I will say though, I was similar where I did not drink underage. I still have not touched hard drugs. Like I'm a rule follower almost to a fault. But I think my rebelling actually came more in my Warped Tour phase. I think if you were to go back to my Instagram in like 2017, I've archived a lot of stuff. I went off the rails for like a year and a half. So like that's later.
Right. Okay, so let's kind of jump back into the timeline here a little bit. So you are, you know, you've got the YouTube channel up and running. You are effectively opening your own doors, taking those chances and making those opportunities for yourself of getting some of those interviews. How long does that go until like Warp? Because you said Warped Tour was kind of the first like the next big step that popped up.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. It was 5 years that I did the YouTube channel.
Okay.
Consistently a video a week for 5 years.
Dude, that is a lot.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And that's also what so that's from like what? I mean 15 to 20, right? Ish, around in there. Is that kind of the time frame there?
It was 2010 to 2015. I think my first Warped Tour I was 19.
Okay. So I feel
Math
like
is weird.
That is like such a big commitment for somebody who is like, I mean, during those years, again, we just talked about rebelling and all this sort of stuff. Like that's when we are figuring out a little bit more, not totally for sure, but a little bit more of like who we are and what we want to do. Those are also the years where we are kind of told like, hey, college is a great idea. You have to go so you can go get a job and you can go be safe. What's that balance like for you while you're pursuing a YouTube channel while effectively also slowly becoming an adult, but still sticking to that and not, and maybe you did obviously, but like so far, like not deviating too much from like, no, yeah, I'm making this YouTube channel thing happen and we're going to see where it goes.
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
Guys, I got the new mix. Cool, let's hear it. Hot off the press. What kind of monster would do this?
Don't torture your friends and bandmates with bad mixes.
Get the Modern Pop Punk mixing and mastering template. Includes mixed tracks and buses for MIDI drums, vocals, guitars, bass, plus master bus processing. And you can even get Slate and Waves versions for multiple popular DAWs. Import your own stems or record directly into the template. The Modern Pop Punk mixing and mastering template includes everything you need to take your mix from start to finish immediately.
Yeah, so when it came time to go to college, I was still focusing on my GPA. Like the whole thing with college was in my brain, and I knew when it came time that I was going to study broadcast journalism. Little did I realize broadcast journalism and what I was doing on my YouTube channel aren't quite the same. I learned a lot of valuable stuff, but that's what I ended up going to college for, and I kept the YouTube channel running through college. I don't know how, so serendipitously, the only roommate I got along with in college was a film major. So when I moved into my dorm, she replaced my mom to film my interviews for me. And we ended up being a little duo for a couple of years. And I believe my math is so messed up. It was either my freshman or sophomore year that I ended up doing Warped Tour. So I would leave for the summer and go on Warped Tour, come back and resume college.
That is what, man, that is like...
I felt like Hannah Montana. I was living a double life.
Right? Yeah. That's an impressive balance to pull off. Like, again, especially during that time, like, because in relation or to compare, like, I during that time when I was like dabbling into like, I was being in bands, graduating high school, realizing I wanted to like work for bands and all this sort of stuff. I still wasn't like clear on anything I wanted to do. Right. I wasn't like, oh, I want to be a filmmaker, or, oh, I want to be a band manager, or, oh, I want to be a whatever. I was just really focused on like, as quick as possible, I need to not have a normal job so I can be creative for my life. Like that was my focus, but it wasn't like a directed focus. And so like, while like maybe I was sort of balancing things or focused on like, yes, I had goals that I was focused on, I still feel like it was just sort of like I was just going and just doing stuff. And so it's like, it's so interesting to hear it maybe it didn't feel like it at the time, or it did, I don't know, but like it does sound like now in retrospect, like there somewhat was a balance, at least like even if it felt chaotic, you're like, cool, I'm doing this thing and I'm still focused on school and doing this, and whether they coincide or they don't, I've got it under control.
I was just steadfast in doing interviews and wanting to be a host. Well, the thing was, especially because I was doing that during such formative years, I couldn't think of a backup plan. I was like, this is it. This is what I'm doing somehow. So there really, for me, there was no other option. So
was your college experience, did it end up being a thing where you were like, heck yeah, glad I went, like that helped me do all of this sort of stuff? Or is it one of those things where you're like, I went, I learned a little bit, but whatever.
Yeah, I think other than the fact that I could say I have a bachelor's degree and I learned about journalism law, which was a very useful course, I feel like I was mostly self-taught. I think it did help with my writing chops quite a bit, which is something that really translated into my PR work that I do now. And I love writing because so much of journalism is writing, even if you're in broadcasting. So I loved that. But yeah, I'd say for the most part, like I made my own way.
Yeah.
I mean, even I had a professor, by the way, one of my last semesters, who said like having a YouTube channel or being a social media journalist isn't journalism. And the whole class just looked at me because we were a very small class. And I was just like, oh.
You're like, You're like, who
great.
would do that?
I'm going to go on tour now.
You're like, well, I would never do that. Like, switch his channel to private for a little bit. Yeah, no. Okay, so what's that first Warped Tour like? Is it just like a blast? Is it chaos? Is it scary? Is it just the most fun ever because you're getting to do the thing? Like,
when I look back at it, it was interesting because I went into it. Obviously, I've never lived in a tour bus before. Did not know how to pack my bag. Was Googling constantly, what do you pack in your bag to go on tour? Not getting much results. Really had to kind of figure it out as I went. Ended up packing my bag so full that I didn't have to do laundry the whole tour because I was so anxious.
Incredible.
It was like, do you know how much underwear and socks that is?
That's a lot. That is a lot.
It was so crazy. So there was a lot of like learning as I went. The thankful thing was because I'd been doing interviews for so long in that exact scene, almost everyone on the tour knew me already. So I had a lot of people with helping hands. The people on my bus I already knew from having interviewed a couple of them. Brian Stars is one of the people on my bus. I don't know if you remember that name at all.
I do, yeah. Absolutely.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a
so I knew him just from like, we're both interviewers. So I did go into it having familiar faces, and Kevin Lyman was essentially my boss. So he definitely took me under his wing as like tour dad. So it was a family thing right away where I felt comfortable and safe. Yeah. And I was also like very young. So I think a lot of people are like, okay, let's look out for her.
Yeah. Which is, super dope. That's like, all right, cool. Let's kind of protect her and help her through this and give her the support that she may need.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's awesome.
I was awestruck by the whole thing. Like to wake up in a different city every day, but also it looks exactly the same outside was so bonkers. And every day to just it was like I was in a dream every single day. Like there was not a day where I took it for granted in the 4 years that I did it. You know, so yeah.
So when you came home from that first one, were you like, I cannot wait to get back out and do more of this? Or was it like, oh man, like how do I readjust to like regular life now? And like, cause obviously you were still like, after that first one, you were still in college, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I was still in college.
So how many years, like what's the next handful of years like? Is it like you said, Warped Tour and college kind of going back and forth, or?
It was, yeah, okay. I did Warped Tour through my entire college experience, basically. So I don't know though, if you have this toxic trait, I would love to know because I was literally thinking about this earlier today, but after something awesome happens in my career, I will like maybe celebrate in my head for 10 seconds. And I'm like, what's next? What do I do next? Where do I get to the next flagpole?
Right.
Do you feel me?
That is a thing that I have definitely struggled with, and that I'm again currently trying to kind of get a hold on of, like letting myself be more present in the moment. And also the bit like that to me is like what I've learned as like we're moving the goalpost, right? Where it's like we're so set on like, okay, if I can get here, that's what I want. I'm going to be so excited. And of course, we're always going to like achieve something, check it off the list and move on to the next thing. Like that's normal. That's growing and evolving. And, you know, of course you want to do that. But there's a difference between that of like getting to the goal, scoring it and being like, oh, no, that wasn't good enough. Move the goalpost again. Or scoring and being like, I did it. Now where's the next one? Like, you know, I think those are two different things. And so like, I do feel you on that of like, it's something that I have really tried to slow myself down on, of being not just more present in the moment and present of what I'm doing. Cause it also leans into the cliche, like it's about the journey, not the destination sort of thing. Right. And that's so difficult to like really find a grip on because of course we want the result. We want to score that goal. We want to hit the goalpost. But then it's like letting yourself take that in when you do, of like taking a few moments to be like, I did the thing that I wanted to do. There's more goals for sure. There's more things like on the horizon that I want. But right now I need to celebrate this thing. Like I've always been pretty bad at that. I think like not like definitely not the best. But it's something that I'm trying to get a hold of now. Like, do you feel like you're still kind of in that mode or?
That is my existence. I mean, I will celebrate. Great. Oh my God, I did this thing. That's awesome. But it is almost an immediate on to the next. So like when I finished that last Warped Tour, like I'm not going to toot my own horn. Well, no, I am going to toot my own horn actually.
Toot away. This is the place for toots.
I knew that I had done the most kick-ass job of any pit reporter. I knew I was like, I freaking did, because I was such a fan of the pit blogs that I was like, I'm going to do all the things that I, as a huge fan of these pit blogs, always wanted to see. And I'm going to do everything I would want to see and experience.
Totally.
And the comments were so good. Like the fans were so kind. I was just like, I think I crushed it. But I also knew that pit reporter job, each pit reporter that had had it before me only did it for 1 year and every year was a new one. So I was like, how the fuck am I going to do this for a second year? Can I curse? I just cursed anyhow.
You totally can. Yeah.
Okay. So I was like, okay, how am I going to do this for round 2? So basically, as soon as Warped Tour ended, completely unpaid, I started a series called Warped Looks Back. I was like, I am going to bust my ass so that they can see that I'm here to stay. If I never leave, then I'm going to come back next year. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but they're not going to get rid of me. So I kept access to the YouTube channel, started interviewing bands post-Warped Tour that were on the tour, saying, cool, so what are you up to now? Now that Warped Tour is done, how was your experience? What's next? You're on this tour in the fall now. How's it going? And lo and behold, I was the first pit reporter to come back for 2 years in a row.
Damn, dude, that is so cool.
But I was like crazed to get the job a second year.
Right. Yeah. Oh no. I mean, you just said yourself like that. Not a lot of them come back, but again, that, you know, who knows what the choice was of anybody else not returning for a second year in a row or whatever. Yeah. But for you made the choice. Like, I'm going to make my own opportunity. I
mean, no one had ever done it before, but I don't think it was necessarily that any of them were bad because they were all great pit reporters and I love and admire all of them clearly as a fan. It was just tradition. That every year there's a different one, but I was like, sorry to whoever wanted this opportunity next, but I'm not done here. So
but the idea of breaking that sort of, you know, unspoken tradition, basically, like of creating a new opportunity for yourself, like I absolutely love that. Like that is so cool of like of not just sitting and again, I'm not saying that anybody else has done this or was doing that or anything, but like it is very easy for us to like accomplish something and then say, okay, cool, I'm going to wait for someone to bring me another result based off of something that I did. It's very easy to get in that kind of wait mode. And that's not necessarily, I'm not saying it's like the worst thing ever. It's very easy to do because life can be chaos sometimes and we find ourselves waiting.
And sometimes it's scary to like go after an opportunity and like try to make it yourself. Like I understand waiting around for a job offer and I've been in those shoes before too. So I'm not saying like I'm constantly this like insane go-getter. I think Warped Tour just like possessed me temporarily.
No, 100%. And I think that's like making something good of that possession, right? Is like, how can I be more involved in this? But also simultaneously, like you're growing yourself while you do it, right? It's not just like I'm chasing after this thing and I'm waiting for the result to be given to me. It's like, how can I do more of this thing? You know, like even me
Yeah.
saying earlier, like when I was, you know, leaving high school and wanted to be just a creative person, there wasn't necessarily that name tag that I was chasing, but I just knew the result that I wanted was like creative freedom of like, how can I not hate my job every day or effectively hate myself every day because of those sort of things? And how can I just be surrounded by being able to do whatever idea I want to do at any point in time? And I think for you, like that, it sounds like that was like, it was centralized in music. And so you are effectively already doing that from the start of like, hey, yeah, cool. I love this Warped Tour thing, but more so I love this interviewing thing. And I love like creating out of this and all that sort of stuff. So then you're creating your own doors. You're creating your own opportunities and almost sort of saying like, hey, yeah, you should probably give me this opportunity because like I'm doing it already. You know what I mean? Like I'm just showing you I can do it. And then cool, if you say, all right, do it over here, then great.
I admire that so much about you, by the way, that you were chasing creativity and like not going, you know, trying to fight the traditional job trap, because there's so many people I imagine who like, not that there's anything wrong with going to the traditional route and wanting security or wanting a normal job. But, you know, I bet a lot of people wish they had like the courage. So
that is respect. The thing. It's like, yeah, you have to kind of, it's a cliche, but like you have to try and eliminate that fear of failure, right? Of just like, you have to embrace like, hey, this might not work, or I might fail. This client might say no, this project might not work or whatever. But it's like, and not to take this whole side quest here, because I still want to keep diving through your story, but like, I think a lot of it comes down to understanding your why and understanding your purpose behind doing something. And I think at the beginning of a lot of ventures, we're not going to be able to necessarily clearly articulate that. Sometimes some people might be able to, of like, no, I know why I want to do this. For me, I can't say my why was super clear other than I really don't want a normal job. That was, you know, me rebelling wasn't necessarily like doing one specific thing. I wanted to rebel just against like the normal world in general, right? I was like, you cannot suck me into working a super normal job forever. Obviously, I had normal jobs to support, you know, growing through all of this.
Course.
But I was like, you know, I can't stay stuck in this forever. I don't want to do this forever. I want to do whatever I want to do. And I think that like, while that's a little bit of knowing a why, I think it definitely took years of doing those things to understand, wait, okay, now that I've done a lot of this, let's reverse engineer why I'm doing it. And I've been able to identify that's like, okay, yes, I love creating, but that's like a super bland thing. And like my two whys are like, I love storytelling and I love connecting with people. Those are my two things. And so it's like, any form that I can do that in. That's why I have, you know, at this point, 3 different podcasts and working on some more of them, because it's like doing each of those different shows fulfills me in a different way. It fulfills that storytelling why in a different way. And that for me is fun. I'm like, it's not about like, I want 100 podcasts so people think I'm a cool podcaster. No, not at all. Like that is a secondary result. For me, it's fulfilling that why. And so it's like, beautiful. I think that's sort of always been the thing of, I think that like when a lot of us don't tend to do that work of trying to reverse engineer that why, I think that's how we get stuck a little bit. Right. Because like there's like the, you know, it's like a want and a need, right? It's like, well, we need money. We need to pay our bills. We need to have a job. Of course, 100%. But it's like, okay, well, you also have to not ignore totally what you want. So like, you know, and that want a lot of the times leans into that why. And of course, that's such a deep question that, a lot of people they're not going to dive into that. You know what I mean? They're not going to dig into like, well, why am I here? It's like, no, I don't know. It's to do whatever and hope my sports team wins. You know, that's fine. That might be the thing. And whatever brings somebody happiness brings them happiness. And that's amazing. I knew for me, honest, true happiness was only going to come with me having a very free and fulfilled life. And that's going to constantly take work to keep up with, right? But I think like that's something that I love that I'm hearing in your story so far is that also no pun intended with that story so far pun there, but now we just pointed it out, so we have to. But I think, you know, that's, you know, so far I'm hearing a lot of that where maybe you did and maybe you didn't early on identify this is my why, this is my purpose, but you were allowing that thought and that feeling to guide and push your decisions. I think it's very easy for a lot of us to ignore those things and be like, that's something I want to do for fun. That's something I'm going to allow myself to do once I work really, really, really hard in the way that the world tells me I have to. Then maybe on a weekend, I'll jam with my friends in a band, or I'll interview for a YouTube channel, or I'll start a podcast, and I'll do it once every 6 months when I have the time. But otherwise, I'm going to beat myself up for not putting a bunch of energy into it. You know, that is like the part where I think a lot of us get it wrong. And even though I maybe couldn't articulate that to myself early on in the same way, and why I relate to you so much in that way is like, I had that almost, I don't know, like unspoken or subconscious feeling that was guiding all of that, where I couldn't sit and still to this day, I'm not like, I make short films and I do podcasts and I do all this sort of stuff. But there's not one of those things in particular that I'm like, that's the thing. Again, it's the why. The why is the umbrella. It's the storytelling. It's the connecting with people. Those are the things. So for me, that allows me my almost creative guidelines to find that fulfillment within. And I hope I'm making sense when I say that, like, I feel like I relate to you a lot, again, in the stuff that you've shared so far of like,
Thanks.
Sure, you can sit and be like, well, no, I obviously wanted to be an interviewer. I obviously wanted to be in the music industry. Yes, those things are clear, but really letting that thing guide you and not letting the fear of I should have a real job, I should be getting a 9 to 5, or, oh my God, I went to college, so I need to do something strictly based off my college thing. And my professor said YouTube doesn't count, like at any moment in time, fear could have reared its head and slowed you down.
It did though.
Okay.
It did though for a moment.
Talk about
and
that.
I'm just like, I'm like busting at the seams to explain this to you, because I think you're just going to be like, whoa.
Yeah.
Because so when I stopped doing Warped Tour, Warped Tour ended. So there was just like, it was over for me. It was over for everyone. I went through a bit of a crisis where, first of all, I was like, how am I making money now? I graduated college. And also I was really struggling to find like journalism opportunities. And I started to have like this crisis about my why, where I was like, maybe it's a bit self-indulgent what I'm doing. Maybe it's a bit narcissistic. Maybe like, am I helping people? Am I doing anything that is like actually of purpose other than I'm having fun? And I started to go through this phase where I was like, maybe I should do something that is not so self-centered, or do something that is going to be of service, or that has a more meaningful purpose, where like people can look at me and be like, wow, she's doing something of meaning. And so that's when I got into the fitness industry for about 2 years. I worked at the front desk at an Orange Theory while studying for a personal training certification, and then going through a week-long boot camp to become a personal trainer. Did that for like a year, busted my ass. I'd say like I enjoyed it for the time, but I was like an empty shell. I was like, this is not fulfilling me. I'm not wholeheartedly myself. This doesn't feel true to me. It was a great job, and I felt like it was a very prestigious opportunity to be able to coach at a gym like that. And I didn't take it for granted necessarily, but it just felt like this is not my forever job. And in that moment, I knew I had helped so many people. I boosted so many people's self-esteem and helped them get healthier. And I was receiving the kindest words, and like, I'd never gotten so many wonderful Christmas cards in my life, but like, it just wasn't it. And I realized that I would do more good for the world by doing something that lights me up, because that's contagious. That 100%. Energy of when I am genuinely inspired can help people more than doing something where I'm an empty shell, but on the outside, it seems I'm helping people. And that's when I took the PR internship while still at the gym. As soon as I was out of an internship and was qualified to actually work in the job, I was out of there.
Yeah. Okay. So one, I am...
The why was like clear, and then got fuzzy, and then was like crystal clear.
Yeah. And sometimes it does take being removed from that to be like, wait, this new thing doesn't feel right. That must mean this was the thing that mattered more. One side note, I am jealous that you were certified as a personal trainer, because that is a goal of mine that I sort of want to like check off on my life list, is like, I want to be certified as a personal trainer because the gym and fitness has become such a large part of my life now that I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, you know what? I kind of just want to say that I could do it if I wanted to. But I also I do think it's incredibly valuable that you did sort of have that time. And it's so interesting that like your time away, quote unquote, from the music industry or the scene or whatever, still took this form of like helping people and being a very positive thing, but ultimately showed you that you were like, this is great, but I'm not feeling the true benefit of it for some reason. And what is that? And then cool, we get to re-uncover our why. How long were you, and if you said this, I'm sorry, how long did you say you were a personal trainer for?
About 2 years.
Okay.
Well, I was working in Orange Theory for 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. So during that whole 2 years, like, what's going through your mind at that time then? Like, is it like a daily struggle where you're like, I feel out of place? Or was it like, did it come and go? Or it was like once every 6 months, you're like, man, I sure would like to kind of get back on the road and go to shows again and, all that sort of stuff. Or like, and I guess my second part to that question is how removed was the music industry from your life at that point in time? Like, was it a total removal, a little bit? Like,
it was basically a total removal other than going to shows and seeing friends occasionally. I was out. Like, I was not hosting anything. I wasn't nothing. I would say my feelings towards it ebbed and flowed because I honestly believed I was at the end of my road. I was like, there is no way as like a thriving adult I can make money and like function and like also be this interview host anymore. Like, there's no chance. I was like, there's no opportunity for me here. This isn't my home anymore. I felt like I'd kind of been pushed out the door. And I had, I guess, come to terms with it. But there were moments where I just mourned what I had and wanted it back so badly, but just felt like there was no way. And at the same time, because I am this kind of person that I said I don't commit to something unless I'm 100% in, I was laser focused on being the best possible coach I could be. I was jacked at that point. Like, I was so all in. So I really did dedicate so much of my time into personal training, and I loved it. I still love fitness. I'm still a CrossFitter.
right.
But yeah, there were just periods where I was sad or was like playing rock music in class to feel something.
Yeah, you're like, hey, does anyone want to mosh real quick while we're in the middle of this?
And
like,
by the way, I had a woman wave me over on her treadmill because I did a butt rock themed class, and she begged me to change the music, and I was like, no can do. This is my class.
Ooh, that's tough. You know what's funny is that at my gym right now, whenever I get a say in the playlist that we listen to during class, I have a butt rock playlist that I'm always like, this is what I want. Dude, it fits so well. Like, of course, there's like, current modern day rock bands that are like, but I'm like, yeah, no, I need a playlist filled with like Limp Bizkit and everything else that like I'm gonna have the most fun here. So like I always push for that whenever I can.
It just hits.
So I feel you. Yeah, and there's only usually like one person in the class who's like, "What are we listening to?" And I'm like, "I love it." And they're like, "You know what? It's fine. Who cares?" They're like, "All right, do your thing, like whatever." So let's talk about the transition out of that then. What became the moment or the opportunity for you that finally led to that choice of like, okay, I'm trying this fitness thing, I'm trying this personal training thing, but clearly it's not clicking, I'm not feeling it, I'm ignoring my why. What was that decision like that brought you out of that?
Well, I just, I had a realization at some point when I was in the gym, because I had this thought that there are no opportunities, there's nothing else for me in the music industry, I'm doomed. And then one day I was like, Tori, you're not looking for the opportunities. You're not putting yourself out there. You're not like being vulnerable in the way of like reaching out to people, asking for help. So I had thought that maybe PR would be a good route for me to go because I've worked with publicists my entire adult life. So I know exactly what they do. And I'm like, it's just flipping it around. So I've communicated with them. I know how the communication with publicists work. So what if I try going that route maybe? And I reached out to Dana from Big Picture Media, and I reached out to Amy Sharetto, who's like just legendary as a music publicist, who's been on our podcast as well now. And they both gave me really good advice. They gave me a few Facebook groups that I could go to for opportunities. And then I ended up re-meeting Steph Maximo, who owns Well That's Fresh PR. At the time, she had literally just started the company and needed an intern. And I knew her from her booking interviews for me when I was doing Rock Forever magazine. So I was like, hey, Steph, can I please be your intern? And it was a no-brainer. She wanted me on the team. So I just learned under her wing. And because I had already, like I said, been in communication with publicists and received press releases and all of those things for so many years, it was second nature. And I felt like it was a nice balance where I wasn't I wasn't having to like leave my house, so I could stay home and have the stability of a home life, but I could also have the fun of being in the music industry. So it was like the perfect balance, and it fulfilled me in that creative way again.
Yeah. Okay. So something interesting that you said in there. So like before you got like entered into world PR and all that sort of stuff, you had said that you were sort of like, you were finding yourself as this personal trainer, and you were like, you had this realization of, wait, I'm not looking for the opportunities. And it's interesting because I feel like the whole first half of your story, we kept talking about how you were creating the opportunities for yourself. So my question is, what do you think it was during that time that maybe like kind of changed your outlook or approach for a little bit of like, because the start, it was, hey, I'm making my own YouTube channel, I'm reaching out, I'm getting interviews, I'm all this sort of stuff. Like, was it this like weird disconnection of like, hey, I was a part of, Warped Tour, now it doesn't exist anymore? Like, was there just not that sort of clear sort of end goal, like light at the end of the tunnel that you were like, that's what I need to work towards, so I'm just sort of in a fog? Or
we're going there then.
What do you feel like it was that changed that outlook a little bit?
I really haven't talked about this publicly since it happened, and it's not something I really super want to get into because it was honestly the complete blow of my self-esteem in the music industry. But I essentially got like soft canceled.
Okay.
Basically, but it was nothing like, anyways. Well, all that to say, the internet was a very scary place for a small period of time. Mm-hmm. A lot of those people came back around later on when they realized what was actually going on, but I was completely secluded and alone. And I was kind of scared to show my face publicly for a long time. And I was already kind of on the outs of uncertain of what my next move was going to be. And then that was the final straw.
Gotcha. Well, one, thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate that. And two, I mean, like, of course that makes total sense as to why you're like, wait, like, because it's not just about the idea of like, oh, someone said some things about me or people are mad at me or whatever. It really is like, at least as an outsider hearing it, because I feel like I've experienced versions of this, not so much the like someone outing, whatever, but like more so almost that identity crisis. That I think is somewhat what it comes down to, is because then you feel attacked or forced to detach from this thing that you attach so much of yourself to.
Full identity crisis. I did not feel safe in the place that I had always called my home. And yeah, it was really, really scary. I will say, I think it's given me a lot of empathy towards like cancel culture and wanting to have a real understanding and listening to all sides, because having been in a very tiny scale in like on that side of things, it is like the scariest thing that could happen to you.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah. No, yeah, I totally agree that's and that's probably a whole other topic for a whole other podcast.
It is.
But
that's a whole hole to go down.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. But yeah, no, I definitely I agree with the like, depending on what it is. Hey, let's hear out both sides.
Well, of course.
Let's see what's really But again, not to make this conversation about that, but I also think back to like, man, I don't know, like, villages of people like ran to the center of town to like stone people back in like the day. Mm-hmm. So I guess they've kind of always sort of like liked doing this in a really weird way. Like now you get to do it just through like comments and hashtags and all that sort of stuff. And
but it was like kind of good timing because I just went private, went off the grid. I was like, I'm going to go work in the gym and I'm just going to find my peace,
Yeah. And so do you feel like, I mean, I know we sort of just talked about it a little bit, but like, do you feel like you found that peace at all? Or like, did that peace come through being disconnected from that? Like, did that help you kind of uncover that why of like, you know what, I'm not doing it. And that feels bad enough that I know that's where I want to be.
Yeah, I think I felt peace because at the time I needed it. I think I needed to step away a little bit because, again, it was that change in perspective to have appreciation for the music industry again and realize it is my home and it's a safe place to be. And it was just one person who can like ruin it for a second. So I think it gave me peace in a time when I needed it, but then very quickly it fizzled out. And I was like, oh no, I'm not fulfilled here.
Right. And so, okay. So when you jump back in via like the PR world, mm-hmm. and so what is that next chapter like? Do you begin to find kind of a new home in that world? Or you're like, cool, this mm-hmm. isn't maybe exactly what I was doing, but it's a new form of, or was it like, hey, this is actually cooler than what I felt like I was doing before? Like, walk me through that.
It was a bit of both, because I think like I was able to stay involved in the music industry. I was still helping bands. I was still promoting music that I really loved and working with artists that I really believed in. But I was able to do it with a bit more like financial security of working from my home. And also at the time I had started a relationship with someone in England. Actually, that happened while I was in the gym. So I was bound to Orlando and realized that having a remote job was my way of being able to fulfill this relationship and grow it.
Yeah.
So that was another amazing opportunity for me to be able to do that. So yeah, it was fulfilling in all ways, where I was like, great, I can go like travel to England and it's okay. I'm not stuck to the gym now, and I can still work in music and write and be creative. It was great. And it just got me back connected to the people that I cared about.
Now, I should have asked this earlier, but like basically in college and out of college, like right after, did you just sort of like, was all of this like your income, like from early on, or was there ever a period, like, again, aside from like being a personal trainer, when it comes to the music industry side of things, like were you just like employed within the music industry from that moment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it was really substantial by any means. No one gets into the music industry to be rich, you know what I mean? But like I was lucky that I had a YouTube channel that was doing well and stuff like that.
Right. Okay. Which is super rad that like you were able to balance that, again, from kind of the get-go of like, again, I'm putting in the work and I'm putting in the effort because I want this to be the thing that is my stability. That's where my stability comes from. That's where my income comes from. But yeah, I was wondering if you were like, yeah, no, I also juggled a job at so-and-so while I was doing this. So how, I mean, you're still in PR right now as we sit here.
Yes.
So what does kind of the rest of the timeline look like after you enter that world? Is it sort of just like a smooth sailing thing from there where you're like, I absolutely love this PR thing? Or when does interviewing and all that sort of stuff begin to rear its head again?
Yeah, so it was smooth sailing and has continued to be smooth sailing. The company has grown so much. So I went from being an intern and now I'm a senior publicity manager over the span of 2 years and some change now. So that's been sick. And then I want to say it was about a year and a little bit ago where I really got in touch with Knotfest. Because I had been working with the editors for some coverage for the bands that I work with. So we'd gotten some premieres on Knotfest and playlist spots for the bands I work with, which was awesome. And then one day I had the vulnerable moment to send them my resume and say, hey guys, so are you looking for a host? Here's my hosting reel. Here's my resume. You know, if you want to get on a call, let's talk. And they wanted to set up a call with me. And I was like, oh shit. And like, you know, full face of makeup. All right. Is my lighting okay? Is everything in place? This is a big deal.
I love it.
Yeah. And we just got to talking and they said, yeah, if you want to come up with like a podcast concept or what do you want to do? And it took a few tries, but then we ended up with She's with the Band, which is now my current podcast. So we've been operating since December with my co-host Alicia too.
Yeah. So walk me through that a little bit. Tell me about that show. Like, because obviously I've seen you share it. I've seen you post it. Now, actually, it's funny. I am familiar with Alicia, but through the pro wrestling world because she is involved in that. So that's where I know her from. Not personally, but just like know of her and her work through that. But walk me through, like, tell me about that show.
Yeah, so basically, as a woman in the music industry, I have a lot to say. And I also am really such a champion for the other women in the music industry. You know, I've had so many good conversations with other artists or just people behind the scenes about what life is like for us out there. And I didn't really see a podcast out there that was doing it within the metal and rock sphere. So the goal was, let's just empower women. But I didn't want to do it in the way of, we're going to sit and have a conversation about how much we hate men, because like, that's not true. And we're not going to have a conversation about how much it sucks to be a woman in the music industry. We're just going to highlight what they do and what they do well and why we deserve our place in the genre. So I felt like just by having good conversations with people who are talented at what they do, that was going to be enough to show, you know, our capabilities. So, you know, at first it was some artists, but then we were also mixing in, like I said, one of the publicists I worked with for many, many years. And we had one of the crew members for Joan Jett, the makeup and wardrobe for Ice Nine Kills, and lots of just incredible women who are doing great things in metal. And then Alicia came into it because she was already hosting for Knotfest. And little did we know, we both started in 2010 with our own YouTube channels and had been watching each other's interviews as research when we would interview the same bands.
That's so
So
cool.
we've known of each other this whole time.
That's amazing.
And originally it was just supposed to be me on the show, but I felt like having her in it was just going to bring a really cool dynamic to it. And the more the merrier. So I was like, come on in, we're doing this together.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so it kind of sounds like you sort of like re-found and re-uncovered that why in the last handful of years of like finding the like, all right, cool, I'm involved in the music industry, but more so you're not necessarily only doing it for other people, right? It sounds like you re-found that way of like, how do I find actual self-fulfillment? Mm-hmm. Because, you know, something you said earlier when we were sort of talking about the personal training side of things, but also how it related to the music industry side of things, like that whole battle of being selfish or being selfless and how can you best help someone else and all that sort of stuff of like, is this a selfish journey? But then how does that turn into doing for other people? And I think you actually said this earlier, but I think it's a vastly important thing of like, when we are our best selves and we are the most fulfilled, right? And we're being a little selfish in positive ways, that actually helps us be more selfless because we've got more to give, right? We've got more energy. We've got a better outlook. We've got all that sort of stuff. And to me, you know, where we're at in the story now is it sort of does sound like you have been able to like re-uncover that, where it's like at first, whether it was like a super conscious decision or not, it might have just more been so like been more out of, I just want to do this stuff and it's super fun and I feel like I'm having a blast. Oh my gosh, this is great. And then getting disconnected from a little bit and then now re-finding that purpose again. Like, does that make sense? Where you like, do you sit here today? Like, of course, there's probably things that you still want to accomplish 100%. But do you feel maybe the most fulfilled that you have? Is that a stress? Maybe I'm like, you know, maybe you're like, dude, okay, slow down a little bit. Like,
you're getting too deep here, man. No. That's what this whole podcast is about. And absolutely, I think, you know, I did a lot of soul searching, especially when we were in lockdown and we were stuck at home. And that was also in my fitness era. So, wow, was I soul searching.
Right.
And I read a lot of Abraham Hicks, The Law of Attraction, Louise Hay, and just books about being in alignment with yourself and what that can do for your life and for other people around you. And I realized I was not in alignment fully. And I think now I do things where it doesn't feel like there's resistance. It feels like things are flowing the way that they should be. I feel like I'm doing things that are just happening organically and feel right, that I don't feel an anxiety in my chest when I do them. Or like good anxiety is good, but like, you know, the bad kind.
Yeah.
And so I think by listening to my intuition a bit more and just believing in the law of attraction and in energy, it has completely changed my life. And so I think that's why I am in the position that I am today. I mean, I don't know if you feel that way too with your creativity and how that can change even just your relationships with people and the world around you.
100%. Like I feel like the newest thing that I've uncovered in life, and I would say the last like probably, I guess it's been a journey that I've been on for the last like 2 years heavily, but I think via some crazy life things happening last year that sort of really made me have to reevaluate just myself. We've already said it in this show, but like my big word now that I land on for everything is fulfillment. And so I agree with everything that you just said of like, I feel like I am now hyper aware of whether I'm being fulfilled or not. And that is almost my driving, like deciding factor in something of like, yeah, sure. Sometimes I might need to say yes to like a client's project that I'm like, you know, as a freelancer, self-employed person, it's like, all right, I need to maybe do that shoot and just say, you know, it might not be the most fulfilling thing, but I need to do it. But ultimately, you know, the reason I sit here, you know, producing 3 different podcasts and wanting to make more and help other people with theirs and shoot short films and make skits and do all these sort of like creative branding, marketing, whatever things is because I know that it fills me up, right? I know that it brings me fulfillment, and that helps me balance out some of those things that maybe aren't the most fun to do. But when I'm being fulfilled more over here, these things that might like in other ways drag me down, they actually don't. right? Because it's like, hey, cool, this doesn't actually have to impact me negatively. I can just see it for what it is, accept it for what it is, not need it to be more, because I'm not searching for anything, right? And I don't mean that in a way of like I'm not searching for more happiness or changes in life or something, but I'm not chasing after that idea of what it means to be me, if that makes sense. And it's funny because I'm going to toss you a compliment here, because after hearing your whole story up to this point, I feel like I have, because from afar, I've, followed you online for a while, and I had you on my old profile before my Instagram got hacked and deleted, and I had to add everybody back.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, R.I.P. But I did always view you as someone, I'm like, man, like she is doing the thing. Like, I don't know her. Again, we're always kind of 1 degree of separation away, but like she's doing so many cool things, and it really seems like she's doing what she wants to do. And after now hearing your story, I'm going to get really cheesy for a second, but I feel like hearing all of this, it's almost that like the Wizard of Oz thing, if you remember that movie, of to
course.
me, when I hear this stuff, it sounds like you had everything that you needed and wanted in you the entire time, right? And because like when I hear your story from day one, you're taking opportunities that not a lot of people would do, right? It's they would sit, and it's very easy for us to sit and want, right? And not take action to do. And it's so interesting that finally hearing your story, you were doing and taking action from day one. And yes, you lost it for a second. You got disconnected from the music industry. But again, like that feeling might have become buried of like, I don't know what to do and I feel lost. But I feel like it was still in you because all you had to do was dig it back up. And then what did you do? You created new opportunities and then got offered those things and were able to take them. And so like that has been at least a through line or an underlying theme that I feel like I've heard through this entire story or this entire, conversation we've had is like, I really do believe that like you have had all of that in you this entire time. And sometimes those things get buried, right? And I say all of that because I feel like I've been on a very similar journey where like early on, I felt like I had it in me, but I didn't know what it was. And I didn't know how to make use of it, right? I was like, there's something in me, but like I have no idea what it is. I'm not smart enough or mature enough to understand it. And then there was just years of sort of like blindly following that feeling like we talked about earlier, like that gut feeling in the back of your mind or whatever. Gut feeling in the back of your mind. That makes sense. But you get what I'm saying. That kind of silent driving force, right? And then it takes almost getting connected from that, because I had those burnout moments where I was like, yo, I am insanely depressed. I'm insanely unfulfilled, but I'm doing things that I want to do. Why is there a disconnect? And it was because those things change over time. And was I really fulfilling myself, or was I just caught now in my own system, the system that we try to avoid, right? When we want to chase our dreams, we can effectively create our own monster of a machine that we get trapped in.
Oh, yeah.
And you get disconnected, and then you're like, wait, what is this? And if you don't step back and reevaluate and learn how to take control of those things of like, all right, what are the opportunities I want, but I don't want to wait for them. So it's like, how can I make those opportunities? And it's just funny that I feel like I've been able to sort of connect a lot of dots, like hearing you explain this, where I'm like, yeah, to me, at least, obviously I'm now forming an opinion on your entire life right now, but I feel like you have done that this entire time. Even if you lost it for a little bit, you still dug it back up and you still refound that like purpose and that why, and turn that into the strength to make a decision to make yourself happy and fulfilled. Does that make sense?
It does. I think over the last couple of years, a big lesson for me has been, if it's meant for you, it'll be. Like, if it's meant to happen, it'll be. And I think, like, I really felt that when I got back into the music industry, where I was like, well, this is meant to be, even though for a while I just was like, no way, no chance. But I think that can only really apply if you listen to your gut, if you listen to your intuition. Otherwise, you're just going to stay lost. You're just going to stay in whatever cycle you've built for yourself, whatever trap you've built for yourself, or you'll get stuck in the comfort of like, I could have been stuck in the comfort of that. I had a salary for the first time in my life, that I had stability for the first time. I could clock in and clock out for the first time. Those things are comforts. And I could have stayed in that, but I knew in my gut, like I just couldn't. And so, yeah, I think like what's meant for you will be, but you got to listen to your gut for that to happen.
100%. So now when you sit and we look forward, what are things that are like potentially on the horizon? Or to ask it in the theme of this show, what are new opportunities that you want to at some point make and take?
Well, there's a few things. I think the first being I want to do more hosting. I've been talking with Knotfest about taking on a lot more. You know, a couple weeks ago, I was in England and I did Slam Dunk Festival with them, and I was at the Heavy Music Awards. It was my first time getting back in the in-person hosting. Everything I've been doing has been over Zoom up until that point. And obviously being Warped Tour girl, being in a festival, I was like, I'm home. Yeah. And I could tell the Knotfest editors saw that too. They saw me just beam up. So I think there's talks of I would love to do more festivals, more hosting in person for them, maybe some more series with them. We'll see.
I love it.
And I also, you know, I'm still dating my person in England, so more and more time is being spent over there. So that's more of a personal goal, but may at some point want to transfer my life over, knock on wood, everything keeps going as planned. And yeah, the PR thing I think is going to stick for a long time, just because I do love being able to give bands opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have had, and getting to do that is so fulfilling as well. So if I could just like be the juggling act at all times, that's fine by me.
Yeah. That's the wild thing is like, I don't know. And like when you say that of like, hey, being the juggling act, I can do that and I want to do that. Like, it's not often that I talk to other people who are like, yeah, I want to juggle all the stuff and just make it happen. Because
I mean, look, there's moments that I want to drop all of the things that I'm juggling and just be like, you know what? I'm taking the weekend.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
But then, like, I couldn't imagine losing one of the balls that I'm juggling.
Yeah, and I think that's also a value of like that's what real confidence is understanding that you can stop juggling it for a second. You know, you can take the weekend. You could take a week off. You could walk away from something for a minute. Like, but as long as you have the confidence of like, no, I know I want it, or I know why I don't want it, right? Mm-hmm. Because then I think we said this earlier, like erasing that fear of failure of like, just trying something and seeing if it works or not, and being okay with whether it did or whether it didn't, and then adjusting your plan from there. I think that's where like, you know, talking about fulfillment and self-confidence and all that sort of stuff, like, I think that's when that stuff comes into play. Like, and that's why I, or, you know, like you or whatever, like are okay with trying 100 different things at once, or opening new doors just to see. It's because ultimately at the end of the day, like, yeah, I'm not saying, you know, by no means is my life like perfectly aligned. And, you know, no, of course I have bad days. But when it comes to that creative fulfillment, or what that then turns into personal fulfillment and what that looks like, I have confidence in knowing myself well enough to create and or take those opportunities when I do and do not see fit. So if something doesn't work, I'm okay with the fact that it didn't work, or I'm okay in believing in myself enough to say that didn't work. Why? And I want it. So now I'm okay with trying my plan B. You know what I mean?
You know, I actually want to ask you too, because for me, I will say I'm okay if something fails. I think you have to have like, you know, for me, it's what I said with requesting big interviews when I first started. The worst that can happen is I get a no or they don't reply. Right. But at the same time, I have this crazy thing where I will not go into a venture with failure as an option. I will not, like, there is no other option than to succeed, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, I'm mentally equipped if it doesn't, but there is no if it doesn't. Do you feel that way, or are you a little more balanced than me?
I would agree, because you also said this earlier, like, when I'm all in on something, I'm all in. Like, I'm like, whatever it takes is what I want to do. Like, I'm going to do it. Where I can disconnect from something is if when I'm in the middle of it, or when I'm doing it, if it like clearly is not working, or it's not making me feel how I thought it was going to make me feel, that's when I get okay with being like, you know what? Like, I think I'll just stop. I think I'll just quit. I think I'll just, you know, that sort of thing, where I almost like, I don't go into it like, again, I do agree with like the all-in mentality of like, I'm not even going to do this with the idea of failure in mind. I'm only going to look at this as how can it succeed. But when I start getting those glimpses of quote unquote failure, or to overuse my word again, like the lack of fulfillment, that's when I think my confidence in the thing overtakes the failure word. And I'm almost just like you said, I can identify something's not for me. And I think that's
Right.
how I tend to look at a lot of that stuff. Like there's random ideas that I've tried over the years where I'm like, at first I'm like, I want to do this so bad. It sounds so fun. And then when I start doing it, I'm like, wait, no, this isn't making me feel how I thought it was. It's not that it's difficult and, oh my God, I failed, I can't keep going. It's more so like, I'm really just like hyper focused on, oh, this doesn't make me feel how I thought it was going to. I tried it. And
that's the thing, though. It's all lessons. There's no failure. There's only lessons.
Exactly. So I do think there's something to all of that. Like, yes, go into something being like, of course, you don't want to go into it with a fear of failure of like, oh, this isn't going to work. And it's like, well, it probably won't at that point, right? If you're you're entering somewhere immediately looking for the exit door, like, do you really want to be there? I don't know, right? But like, I do think that like, when it comes down to that failing thing, like my big thing is like, I almost have a problem with what ifs, where I can't let something be what if. Like if it's genuinely a tangible thing or an opportunity that I can take or whatever it is, like what ifs drive me crazy because I will sit and I'll just picture what it could be or could have been or whatever. And I'm like, I at least got to give it a shot. But when I give it a shot, I'm almost so comfortable with like, I checked it off my list and it's no longer a what if. I'm now comfortable with if it turns into a isn't anymore or something. You know what I mean? I'm like, cool, I don't have to think about it anymore. I tried it and it worked or didn't work. It fulfilled me or didn't fulfill me. And cool, I can disconnect from that. Like I feel like I've gotten, I don't know if you feel this way or not. Like I feel like I have gotten fairly good at allowing myself to like, and it's not easy all the time, but like being able to disconnect from something. If I'm like, this really doesn't serve me in the way that it should, or I wanted it to, or I hoped it would, or whatever. Like, I'm not saying it's as easy as an on and off switch, but making at least that decision has become slightly easier for me over the years.
I think that's come with age for me as well. As I get older and, I have more obligations and responsibilities where I'm like, cool, I don't have the time for that. If that's not making me happy or if that's not going somewhere positive or beneficial in any way, cut it. Because I have this, I think it's almost like having an abundance mentality of like, there's more out there. There's other things that I could do. I think when I was younger, I had a scarcity mentality of trying to grasp onto anything I could, any opportunities, any friends. I was like, just take what you can get. Whereas now I'm like, there's plenty out there. So if this one's not for me, that's okay.
Yep. 100% agree. Well, to prevent us from talking for like 4 hours, we can.
You don't want to pull another Davey, basically.
You know what? But I think I do love doing those. Like, I absolutely. I'll sit here. That's the dangerous part. There's so many times when like I'll go like get coffee with somebody, either to catch up or to meet for the first time and chat. If I'm not meeting them for the first time on a podcast, like my friends and people who know me now label them as Ross Talks because it has become a reoccurring theme where like if we sit down and start chatting, I'm all in on the conversation. So like I'll schedule my day around like I'm probably gonna want to talk to them for a while, and if they're down, we'll go. I'll end up talking to people for like 4 to 6 hours sometimes, and that might sound insane, but like again, I love connecting with people over that. Like if we're gonna talk love languages for a second, my number one's quality time. And so it's like quality time for me looks like that, where it's like, hey, if we just sit for hours and talk, I'm good. Cool. We made a connection. We built a friendship. We whatever. Like even with like potential clients, I've done that where it's like we'll end up talking for 2 or 3 hours and they're like, oh, I'm sorry I kept you. I thought this was going to be like a 30-minute meeting about our project. And I'm like, no, like we actually just connected as human beings more, and that's going to only help our project. So like I'm down.
I mean, that's a beautiful quality to have. Your ability to tell stories and connect is so precious. So I respect a Ross Talk, and it is dangerous that we have the same love language because it is showing in this episode.
Yes, 100%, 100%. So yes, to prevent this from being a 4-hour conversation, I have a last handful of questions for you.
Okay.
So and they're going to be a little more like kind of left field, like more formal type of questions.
Okay.
But right now, I would love for you to pretend like you can travel back in time, right? So I would love for you to think of a time in your life where if you could go back and talk to little Tori, where would you go in your life and what would you tell her?
Whoa. I think I would honestly go back to like 15, 16-year-old Tori where it was just me and my mom at that point. And I, my self-esteem was weird because I had a supportive mom. And like I said, the dad where it was questionable. And I was so like in a rebelling phase where I almost would like listen to my music really loud on purpose. So people knew I was angry and upset and all these things. And I would just be like, dude, you're about to go on the ride of your life. Like everything you think you want to do, you're going to do it and more, so just trust yourself. Like you know better than anybody. You're on the right path. Just have fun. And I would also say just like, don't stress, don't have anxiety. Things always work out the way that they're supposed to, because I mean, you know what? I should say that to present Tori. You don't have to worry. You don't have to have anxiety. I still live with that, but everything's going to be fine. Just trust yourself.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, my next question for you. So I've been doing a new thing on the show as of late where I have been having my guests give me a question to ask my next guest. So this is a two-part thing. So one, I'm going to give you the question my last guest gave me. And then if you can think of one to give my next one, I'll take that one. So this question that the last guest left for you is, what drives you to compete to get better? So basically, what drives you to get better?
Wow, that is such a crazy question that I've never thought of. I think this might be the first time in my life as a chatterbox that I'm like fully silent and stumped.
I love it.
I think I really am just competitive by nature though. I think anyone who's really close to me can attest to that. Like if I'm in the gym, I want to be working out next to somebody else because I just want to compete. And not because I'm like in a toxic way. I just think it's fun to like one up myself and like surprise myself. And I think challenging myself builds so much resilience mentally, or if it's in the gym, it's physically, and I get stronger. So I think like putting myself in challenging situations, although like sometimes I enjoy being comfortable, those moments where I get out of my comfort zone always end up being my most fulfilling moments. Yeah. So I suppose that's my answer.
Perfect. I mean, I guess they're not here to get the answer, but you know what? Hey, I'm going to say that was a perfect answer. I love that.
They're probably super disappointed. They're like, what a cliche.
But that's not what I want. Yeah, no. So would you have one? Would you have anything that you would love for me to take to my next guest and ask them?
Well, this is a question I just love asking people in general, but maybe like, what is the biggest misconception about you, or the thing that you feel is the most misunderstood about you that you want people to understand better?
I absolutely love that.
Woo!
100% love that. So,
but like as an interviewer, I had to have a question on deck.
Yeah, you could have been like, "What's their favorite pizza?" I don't know.
How'd you come up with your band name?
Yeah, classic. So sticking with the theme of you coming up with questions, I've also been doing another thing here on the show where I am, I've been asking you all these questions. We've been talking about your life, and these last handful of questions, I've been grilling you, throwing you in the hot seat, just like we talked about not doing at the beginning. But I've been giving the guests the opportunity to also fire a question my way. So you are an interviewer. You do this often. So this show is officially yours for a few moments. Whoa. Is there anything that you would love to ask me?
Well, I think because you have such a thoughtful show, and I feel like you probably learn things about people that they may have never shared before, or just like really profound conversations. So I'd love to hear if there were any life-changing conversations you've had, or like life-changing epiphanies that you've had through the conversations on this podcast.
I love that question. I hope this isn't a cop-out answer, but I almost feel like doing this for 3 years has almost collectively been like a life-changing experience. Like we talked about how earlier it was like, hey, this is a cheat code to make friends. And it absolutely is true. Like I'm connecting with people over some of their most vulnerable moments, right? And thankfully being able to create not only a conversation style, but just a situation in which people are comfortable enough to share those things. It's not just a Q&A like, hey, tell me cool things you do and wrap it up and where can people follow you, right? And I really do think that like maybe I do have one particular thing. To make a long story short, there was a guest I had who in her story, she shared that she did not have a good relationship with her mom. Growing up, there was a lot of disconnect. There was a lot of kind of unknown mistreatment from mom to her. And she shared all that on the show of like kind of what that's done to her, what she kind of had to grow out of and learn from and all this sort of stuff, and just how that was a struggle. And after that episode came out, you know, a lot of her family members and stuff like that listened to it, and her mom listened to it.
Wow.
And her mom, you know, they had never like, and from that point in time, like after she moved out and moved away from home and all that sort of stuff, they didn't have a good relationship. They would talk maybe once or twice a year, wouldn't ever really communicate, because there was those problems from growing up, right? So her mom listened to it and actually reached out to her and gave her an apology. And her mom reached out and made an effort to not only apologize, but to also reconnect and basically say, I would love for us to rebuild what our relationship is, because I'm sorry that I didn't know that I was doing that to you. Of course I've got my own problems. I'm not perfect at all. And I didn't know how much I fucked up, and could you forgive me, and could we reconnect? And that friend has since FaceTimed me getting dinner with her mom. And her mom like loves me, a person she's never met, because of that conversation, because of that platform that I gave her daughter to share those feelings and those stories. And effectively me making a podcast where I talk to people about their lives reconnected a mom and a daughter who had a terrible relationship. And now they communicate relatively often, and they're getting dinner together, and they're visiting, and they're all this sort of stuff. Like they have a healed relationship. And there's of course potential that maybe would have happened had, you know, this show not happened or whatever, but that was at least the catalyst of it happening when it did. Right. And so I think the reason I share that story isn't just to be like, oh, isn't that so cool? But more so, that's maybe the life-changing thing for me, is that it's made me realize like, hey, that whole like power of connection that you hope to have with people, it actually does happen. Right. Because there have luckily been several, if not dozens of stories similar to that have happened adjacently because of this show. And it's not only helping people, you know, I get told so many times after I wrap up these interviews, people are like, man, that felt like the therapy session I've always been wanting to have. Right. Wow. And they're like, that was, you know, it's a recorded therapy session, but a therapy session nonetheless. And it's because it's like, hey, let's just talk about you for 2 hours. Right. Let's talk about your story. Like, tell me the stories of growing up, and tell me the struggles, and tell me all these things, and whatever you want to share, of course. But because of that, you know, when you can help somebody and give them the space to say, hey, let's just focus on you. Right. That doesn't really happen a lot in normal life, unless you're going through a crisis and you're like, friend, I need you to sit down with me and listen to what I'm going through. Right.
Right.
And so I think that has been one of the coolest things for me, is like, yes, I could sit and be like, you know, I get tons of compliments on like, hey, you're a great host of any show that you do. Hey, you're a great interviewer. Hey, you ask really good questions, whatever. But I think ultimately for me, the coolest thing that has come from doing this show is, jokingly, yes, it's a cheat code to make friends, but I also think in this weird way, it's almost a hack to like really matter in someone's life and have you matter in theirs in a way. And yeah. I, you know, again, Ross talks, I love having him in real life too. Like I would prefer to sit down with somebody for at least more than an hour and sit and chat about everything. Mm-hmm. And so it's like stories like that and examples like that have shown me that it's like, all right, cool. You can make a cool podcast, whatever. But more so the hidden value that you were kind of hoping that it would have, of teaching somebody something, or somebody learning something about themselves, or a listener learning something from someone else's story and all that sort of stuff. I've seen those benefits and I've seen those results. And that I think is the coolest part for me, that is like in turn changed my life, because I'm like, wow, what you're doing matters more than like, well, how many views did that episode get, or how many listens, or how many, you know, whatever. That like genuine connection part, back to the fulfillment thing, that's what I love doing. I love connecting with people. And when that, like something as simple as a podcast interview, when that domino effects into something like reconnecting family members or whatever, or helping somebody understand themselves better, that is like the ultimate win for me. So that in turn is like my kind of life-changing thing that I get from this show.
Wow. I mean, I think that's why I value what you're doing so much, right? Because as a host, you're a good listener, and that's what makes you a good host. That's something I learned from my mom, actually, because she also does coaching, public speaking and stuff. And she was like, instead of thinking about what you're going to say next, just listen and then respond. And I think that is what, even just in conversations, makes a connection so great, isn't it? Is just being a good listener. Yeah. And I see that in you for sure. And I admire that so much, because you're giving people the space to speak, which is often forgotten, especially in a podcast, which is typically very performative.
Right. Well, yeah, no, thank you. And I'm glad again that is how that comes off, because that was, my thing from day one with this. Like, that's why, when we were getting ready to record, I was like, hey, this isn't a Q&A. I want it to be a conversation. It's like, that's, yes, there's formal questions like this, stuff tossed in and all that. But like, I've always wanted to feel like that. It's like, all right, cool. I was hyper aware of that from the beginning. I'm like, all right, this show is supposed to be about other people. It can't be about me overtaking everything and be like, oh, let me talk some more. So this is cool. Like, I shouldn't have a guest at that point if that's what I want to do.
That's where most hosts mess up. That is where most hosts mess up, is because they're like, I have the spotlight. It's like, chill, man, chill.
Yeah.
People aren't watching for you most of the time. They're watching for who you're with.
Yes, I think
in your case, though, because you're great at it, people are going to keep watching for you.
Well, hey, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. Like, I feel like I look at hosting in two different ways, where one, I'm like, all right, I have to be a good host in general, whatever that means. I need to be good on camera, because I'm sure you've listened to podcasts before too, where the host is like, all right, hey, welcome to the show. Nah, is it really stacked? So I'm like, what are we doing? Or it's the opposite.
It's like, hey guys, welcome to the podcast.
And it feels
like, all right,
inauthentic.
Ow.
And you're like, so I'm like, and that's the funny thing is, like, I feel like my energy, even as like a host, like, because sometimes you have a host voice, right? You speak in a certain way, but it's like, it's not that different from how if we were sitting in a coffee shop right now, this is how I would be talking. You know what I mean? Right. That's the energy that I'm going to naturally bring. And so, yeah, I do think that finding that balance of like, all right, don't overtake the show, don't be a bad host. And also, yes, you're 100% right. And just like the listening factor is something that so many people overlook, is because like you're so worried about filling time, or you're so worried about not letting there be dead space or getting to the next question. And it's like, you can not have dead space by just having a good conversation, not being worried about what next question do I need to ask.
Like you'll know what your next question is if you're listening to what they're saying.
Yes, 100%. Okay, so final things for you. So 2 final questions. One is, looking back at your journey, what do you feel like the biggest thing is that you have learned about yourself?
I think I've already said it, is really, when my energy is right, I'm doing my best in the world. Like, I think I'm the best friend to people. I think I have the energy to give back in the community or be kind to others. And I think like I need to just do things that make me happy and feel, keyword, fulfilled, because that's when I am the best version of myself that I can be of service to others. Not doing things that I feel like are of service to others, but absolutely leave me empty. So, yeah, I think that's been a big one.
One final question for you. So I end all of these episodes with the exact same question. So now I'm going to toss it to you. So right now, I want you to pretend like everyone in the world is listening to you speak. So maybe the pressure's on. I don't know. All right. But everyone in the world can hear you, and you get to share something with them. You've got a live mic attached to everybody. So you get to share something with everybody around the world. What is it that you would tell them, and what would you want them to hear?
Have empathy. Look at the person next to you, or the little animal next to you, or whatever it is that's next to you, and put yourself in their shoes, and then treat them the way you want to be treated. Just have empathy with everyone and everything around you.
Tori, I am so stoked. I am so stoked that we made this happen. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time out of your day and just being down to be on the show. Like, this was so much fun. Like, thank you. I feel like this is definitely the best way we could have finally actually met and connected. Again, absolute cheat code unlocked. Absolutely, 100%. Like, yeah,
the only thing that could have been better is if I could have flown to you and done this in person. Yes. But truly, like, I was thinking that during this podcast. I'm like, he's been talking to me for so long. I can't believe I'm like so lucky to have your time to have this conversation. So thank you for giving me the space to share it with you.
Yeah, dude, of course. Thank you, of course, for being down on the show. Thank you for your time. Like, I am unbelievably stoked. And I feel like there's probably a reason that we never met before now. So it was like, hey, you know what? It's just going to be years of almost friendship now culminating to this. And we turn it into a podcast because why not? What else happens when two hosts of different things end up meeting for the first time? Well, of course it's going to be recorded and shared. Any last things before we officially wrap up? I mean, we've talked about the plethora of different things that you do, whether you're a part of. This is the plugs and promotions time of the show when we wrap up. Of course, everything will be in the show notes for direct links, but are there any direct things, whether it's your social, whether it's anything you're involved in, that you would love for people to go check out?
Yeah, I mean, really the big thing right now is She's with the Band. That podcast has really been such a positive experience. I think it's been the most fulfilling thing that I've done throughout my career. So if you're interested in hearing the stories of women in the music industry and the amazing things that we're doing out here, check it out. Tori and Alicia is what the socials all are. Or if you happen to be listening to this as a musician and you need some help promoting your music, or even just have questions about how the hell PR works, my inbox is always open to chat.
Tori, I'm going to say it again. I cannot thank you enough for doing this show. That was an absolute blast.
Thank you.
So stoked on that one. Tori absolutely rules. And if you want to keep up with all the cool stuff that you just heard her talk all about, be sure to go follow her at Tori Kravitz. Definitely go check out her podcast along with her co-host Alicia Tout. It is called She's with the Band. You can follow that show at SWTB Pod. And of course, if you're in a band and you think you could use some publicity that Tori can offer or any help or connections, be sure just to reach out to her in general. All the info for everything is linked directly in the show notes, as always, or, you know, they're down there wherever you're listening to or watching this at. Check the show notes. That's where all the info you need will be. Also, be sure to follow this show at WYDH Pod. Please toss a follow if you haven't yet. You can follow me personally if you'd like. I'm at Ross Tyson just about everywhere. I also ask you to double check that you're subscribed on whatever platform that you check this out on, whether it's Apple, Spotify, I don't know, one of those random podcast apps that I've never once heard anyone say anything about, but they somehow still exist. This show is probably out there on it. So hit a subscribe or a follow button wherever you're at, wherever you're listening or watching. I do truly appreciate all the support. And of course, you can find these episodes in video form on my personal YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Ross Tyson. I really would love for you to find that subscribe button over there as well. If you want to take an extra step in support, drop a rating and a review. It truly does help out a ton. You got to let that algorithm know that you or anybody can enjoy this show, and then it shows it to more people, and then we continue feeding the machine and making all the cool stuff. Or so I've been told. That's how it works. But that'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you watched on YouTube, I really do thank you for looking. And I cannot overstate how much I appreciate everyone just checking this show out on really any platform, wherever you do, however you do. The support goes a super long way, and it's freaking rad that people love this show in any way. You're wonderful, and I will catch you in the next one, where I'll be sitting down with my next guest, whom, I don't know, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but they'll be sharing a story that you for sure never heard.